Hey there! This video is a short segment of my new wine bottle product visualization video. In this video we're going to use an interesting method of using displacement layers to create a wine bottle cap. If you'd like to see the rest of the video, you can go over to 3dfluff.com where I have the rest of the video for sale if you're interested. Until then though, I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. Right, on to the screw thread top for this bottle. Now, this is something where there are potentially a lot of different ways you can approach this. I'm not a fan of all these spline, extrude, sweep methods, nor am I all that enamored with trying to do this with subdivision surfaces and trying to do it that way. Instead, when I do objects like these, I much prefer to go through the route of just simply displacing the surface, because it leaves it very parametric, very adjustable, and you haven't got to sit there learning a whole host of different polygon tools in order to do it. So with this, we're not going to use any reference, we're just going to sort of do it by eye. You're very unlikely to have any actual reference footage, reference imagery of such an object. So we're just going to sort of look at one in real life and use this as a bit of reference. So what we're ultimately going to do is take a cylinder object and we're going to displace it with a material. But there's a number of things we can do to make this process easier. Otherwise, there's lots of test renders, it's hard to see, it's not very sort of creative or instantaneous. So let's go ahead, shall we? So first things first, let's get a good even mesh for our cylinder here. If you go to the display mode, we're currently looking at Gorard shading. If we go down to Gorard shading with lines, we can see the mesh we have on our cylinder. So what we've got to do when you're dealing with any sort of displacement system, you need to make sure you have a nice evenly divided mesh. Right now we just have these long thin rectangles which are going to be a very bad candidate for us to displace into the surface. So on our cylinder, let's find our height segments. We've only got one, and we're just going to turn it up until this visually looks like a cap. And I should also say, by the way, it's probably a good idea at this point to also make it roughly the right shape. So we're just going to concentrate on the actual sort of screw thread grip perforated section you see at the top. The rest of the body, which goes down the side, we can just pull those out at the very end. So let's get this sort of roughly into the proportions we want for our cap. And let's add those height segments until all the polygons on the side look kind of squarish. So there we go, lucky 13. And let's start with our displacement. Okay, so let's add a material. Let's throw this onto our object. And what we're going to do is dive on down straight into displacement. So just to give you a quick idea about where this is all going. We're intending to use a series of gradients layered up to make our displacement. So let's just start off with one and you can sort of see where this is going then. So under texture, I'm going to choose gradient. And then to edit the settings of the gradient, just click on the big gradient button in the middle. So what we're looking to do is make this gradient into just sort of one or two bars, which will act as the thread running around our cap here. So where it's black, nothing will change, and where it's white, it will get indented. So we're essentially looking to move these knots around. Pop a black one over there, and you can see this black, white, black. This gives me a stripe. The issue at the minute though is we can't really see it on our object because you don't usually see displacement in real time. So just a quick little hint for now. If you come down to your editor section, this isn't somewhere a lot of people tend to visit. This is what Cinema's going to display in the real-time OpenGL. And currently it's trying to display a combined mode. It's trying to show us the color and the luminance and the bump and the transparency all in one go. But to be honest, it can never really show displacement. But if you change this from combined, you can tell Cinema just display our displacement channel as a color. So in this pull down menu, if you just choose displacement, that gradient we made, let's go back to displacement, that will now get shown as a texture in here. So you can see there's our vertical stripe. And you can also see it is also putting that texture along the top. So I tell you what, just for now, I think I'll turn the caps, the top and the bottom, on this cylinder off. I don't really want to see those getting textured just yet. So caps, we'll just disable them for a minute. Okay, so this is what we've got. We've got our white stripe running down there, but we need this to be a sort of helix spiral going around the object. So in the gradient, we're going to change the type. And now it's got a few different shapes. You can do radial shapes, circles, boxes, but the first two are really just sort of vertical and horizontal. So if this gradient is not going in the direction you want it to, where it says U and V, just choose the other one you're not using. So at the minute we've got two-dimensional U. Well, if you choose V, it's just going to flip it around. Okay, so this gradient now represents a nice white band running around. But what we're looking to do is make this into a corkscrew spiraling. So one thing this gradient has is an angle setting. If you turn this up, this will let you tilt and spiral that gradient around, effectively giving you the corkscrew. Now, we want our cap to maybe sort of need to be turned sort of once or twice in order to undo it. So this one single band is not really enough. It doesn't go around far enough. So what we're looking to do is put two white stripes in our gradient. So if I just pop another black gradient there, another one over there, and then I'll pop a sort of whitish one in the middle, you can see we're starting to get this helix which spirals around. Now we will need to tweak these positions to get it looking right, and we will need to tweak the angle, because if this goes up too high, it's just horizontal. But if we get the angle right and we get these things to overlap, then there we go. More or less, that's our corkscrew spiraling around. But let's tidy this up. If we're going to have any chance of getting this sort of neat and tidy and all in the right place, we're going to have to get the positions of these correct. Now, just before we go any further, let's consider what do we want to actually add to this entire cap. Well, yeah, obviously there's the corkscrew section, but we also want maybe some little bubbles around the top, a grip area around the middle, some perforations so you can detach the cap from the rest. And then there's usually some sort of horizontal bar which holds the rest of the cap structure to the bottle once the cap's removed. So we can't have our helix taking up this much space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and restrict this helix to sort of roughly the top half of this. If it's not large enough, don't worry, we can always resize and scale this thing up. But if we make this too large to begin with, we're going to struggle to fit all the other elements in. So in our gradient, let's give ourselves a little bit more space here. From here to the right, this will be the top of our gradient. So I'm going to try and restrict the bottom half for the grip, the perforations, and all the other bits and pieces we're going to add. So let me just shuffle these bits on up over there. So there's one ring, there's another ring, and I'm also going to try and sort of keep these numbers fairly uniform. I want to try and get the spacing between these nice and even. If you unfold the gradient with this little arrow here, then what you have is a position value. This tells you how far along that particular knot, we call these things knots by the way, it tells you how far along that gradient knot is. So I'm just going to round off some of these values. And I'm thinking, if we sort of start roughly here for our screw thread, that looks a bit better. This first one, let's just round the numbers off. Let's say you can have 60% on the position. And I'm going to try and get the others all fairly evenly spaced. So if we say sort of 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, that would then leave us with a little bit of space at the top for anything else we want to put just above the screw thread. So let's choose this one here and round this up to 65. This one here, let's round this one up to 70. I'm not sure I want to leave the same amount of gap, because this bit here between the two black parts, that's how much space we have running between the two threads. So I'm not sure I want to leave the full same amount I'm using for that. So where did we finish here? That's 70. Let's just maybe add 2 or 3% to this one. So let's start the next one, at about 70, let's say 72. But we're adding 5 to each one. So 72, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 77. And then 77 plus another 5 is going to be 82. So that leaves this group of knots and this group of knots all fairly evenly spaced. Let me just check my maths there. So, oops, don't add that. So 60, 65, 70, 72, 77, 82. Yeah, okay, so that's 5% in between each of those. So we should now pretty much have 2 evenly sized, evenly spaced stripes running around here. We can now tweak our rotation, our angle value, so that we get these things overlapping. Now, depending whether you go plus or minus, the screw thread will go one way or the other. I will just save you a bit of hassle. Make sure it's set to a negative value. If you leave this as a positive value, your screw thread will run the wrong way, and you won't be able to actually unscrew the thread on this bottle correctly. You'll have to turn it the wrong way. So basically, I made that mistake whilst I was making this project in the first place. Got to the very end and thought, that screw thread's not going to work, is it? Anyway, so let's go roughly -7. By the way, don't forget to check that these are all the correct colours. So these should be solid black. That's good, that's good, that's good. Maybe the RGB is easier to see these with. And these ones should be solid white, so that's good. And this one here, yeah, as I suspected, it's a little bit grey. So just make sure you have just pure black and white colours in here. Now, we want these two things to line up perfectly, but it's going to be quite hard to get this perfect. So let's go ahead and show you how to get a better display than just using this editor channel in the material. So I'm going to set this back to the standard combined view, and I'm going to show you a neat trick, how to see displacement in real time. Because at the minute I'm having to hit the render button to see these things getting displaced. So what we're going to do is we're going to make use of Cinema's Displacer Deformer. This allows you to choose an image and displace it onto your bit of geometry. But one thing it also allows you to do is just display a material you already have on your object. And it's a bit of a weird name. I seem to say that about a lot of things in cinema. But on Displacer, let's apply it. And the thing we're looking for down here is called emulation. The emulation mode tells Cinema, use the material. Apply all the displacement from that material object which is applied. So as soon as I turn this on, we can now see that this is what that screw thread displacement is doing. Now, obviously, we have nowhere near enough detail on this object to properly show all the detail. So let's just jump on in and crank up the number of polygons we have. So on the cylinder, on the main object page, let's see, we have 36 rotation segments. Let's just go completely mad with this. Let's go 500. Okay, so that's lots of rotation segments going around. But now let's do the same thing top to bottom. So height segments, again, let's just throw in a similar number. Let's go 500. And there we go. Far more detail. We can now safely turn off our line display mode. And this is what we're getting. So this is our screw thread. We haven't had to model this. We're going to be able to add extra things to it. But this is all just being done through the displacement. And if we get a close look over here, you can see we haven't quite lined up these two bits. We've got a little bit of a step running through this. So I'm going to jump back into my material. This doesn't need to be quite so large. And under displacement, in the gradient, we're just going to tweak how much it is tilting these gradients. I don't want to have to sit here trying to adjust these because that's going to be tricky. It's far easier to change just this one single number here than it is to adjust all of these. So let's see. As I go up, that breaks it, okay, but as I go down, that breaks it the other way. So we are going to have to start putting in some small decimal numbers. A little bit of advice when you do this. Hold the Alt key. Normally when I click and drag, when I click on this number gadget, it changes by 1 degree at a time. But if you hold down Alt, it will change by 0.1 degree. So I've got a bit more of a fine control. So there. that's looking pretty close there. In fact, that's close enough for me. We might come back and, whoops, I bet you've all done that before. Hold down number 3 to navigate and fill in a number you didn't want. Where were we? Minus 6.9. Okay, so that's looking close enough. Maybe we'll come back and add a few decimal points if we notice there's anything not quite lining up, but that looks pretty good to me. I'm very happy with that. So now, what about the rest of this thing? Well, let's stick on our thread for a minute. First things first, the thread is going the wrong way. With these foil caps, all they're really doing is they're clamping in the shape onto the bottle. So really, this should not be sticking out, this should be sticking in. But the other bit is that we have these sharp edges. So this start and end of the thread obviously shouldn't be these sharp sticking out shapes. So this is where our layering stuff comes in. If we go back to our displacement channel, all we have right now is one single gradient. This is not enough control for us to do the things we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to start layering some stuff up. So first of all, let's actually add in a layer system. So texture. So long as you have something here, by the way, when you choose the layer, it will place that item inside the layer for you. So when I click on my layer shader, here's the gradient we were just working with a moment ago. But the thing is, we can now add lots and lots of stuff into this list and get more control. So we want to fade out these edges. But just before we go ahead and do that, let's try and sort of pre-plan a little bit. I want these threads to be pushed into the surface, but I may want other areas where it pulls little parts out of the surface. So what you've got to be careful of is that with this displacement, typically it only goes one way. You can displace inwards or you can displace outwards, unless you plan ahead a little bit and start from 50% grey. If you start this artwork at 50% grey, that means you can then use black to go down or white to come up. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. We're going to start off with a 50% grey base layer to work from. So these buttons here, this will allow you to load pixel images, and this one will give you access to all of Cinema's shaders. So gradients, layers, tile effects, whatever else. This is the familiar pull down menu you'll have seen before. And one of the items we've got in here is simply just called colour. It's otherwise a fairly useless thing, but when you're layering things up, it's quite useful because with a colour, I can put that at the bottom of our layer system, and we'll just click on its little thumbnail and say, look, you should be 50% grey. Okay, so to go back, by the way, we've got these back and forward buttons, just like in your web browser. So let's go back. So we're starting from 50% grey at the bottom, and what we ultimately want to do is subtract this artwork from the grey. This will cause these things to then go inwards. So just to show you what I mean, here's our gradients. Let's say subtract. There we go. So that's now going to push those black parts into our 50% grey, and our thread will now be embedded into the surface. We do, at this point though, immediately spot a bit of an issue. Because we've started with grey, and because we're taking away the full value of these colours, it clips. You notice that the bottom of these threads bottoms out, it goes flat in the middle. That's because this part here is grey, this part here is black, and well, once you've reached black, there's really nowhere else to go, so it just sort of bottoms out and stays there. So when we're subtracting colours, what we mustn't do is ever add or subtract more than 50%. So again, what I'm trying to get at is these white lines we're taking away, they shouldn't be white. We need to go in here, open this up and say, look, these white bits we're taking away, they should only actually be 50%, because that means it now doesn't go too far anymore. It will bottom out at black, but then it's immediately straight back out to the grey areas. So I'm going to do that for both threads. 50% value, 50% value. Okay, so that's leaving us with a much nicer, smoother thread on our Not even sure what this part's called. Cap, I guess. Okay, anyway, we still need to smoothen off these edges. So this is where we start layering things up. And if I could give you some advice, it's definitely use some folders. We're going to end up with a whole series of gradients for the thread, a bunch for the thumb grip, maybe some more for the bottom and for the top. We're gonna get quite a few items in this list. And by making a few folders, we can at least keep track of what's what and not have to deal with everything all at the same time. So add a folder. And this folder, let's double click to rename it. This is going to be the thread group. And let's go ahead and throw the gradient inside there. Oops, missed. In you go. And again, it's a good idea to rename these things as well. So this gradient here, this is the sort of helix spiral going around the object. Now, just a note on these mix modes. If you're used to using this stuff in Photoshop quite a lot, it is exactly the same. If you're not used to using this kind of stuff in Photoshop, let me just give you a very quick crash course. All these mix modes are going to blend the layers together. So the easiest things, or the most common things perhaps, are to add values together, which will make things get brighter, subtract values, which will make them get darker, or multiply values, which means you only get the sort of combined mixture of both layers at the same time. Basically, multiply, add and subtract tend to be the things you need the most. Sometimes a bit of screen is useful as well, but that's very similar to just adding things together. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to make a folder of artwork, and then that entire folder is going to be subtracted. So right now, I don't actually want to subtract this helix. I want to subtract the folder which contains the helix. This might seem a bit sort of academic and a bit pointless, but the key thing is we're going to be adjusting and tweaking this helix spline artwork. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw in another gradient. And this gradient is going to block out the start and the end. So let's see, we're going to go shader, gradient, and let's give it a name so we don't lose track. This is the thing which smoothens the start and the end. And all we really want for this, again, let's have a quick look at our helix spiral. And by the way, if you need a larger preview, these thumbnails, right click and choose open window. You've now got a nice resizable window, so you can see a much larger version of your artwork. So let's pin that over there, and we'll chuck this over to the side. Okay, so our spiral artwork, it's this bit here which is causing a sharp edge, and this bit here which is causing a sharp edge. This one below is fine because this actually wraps around onto that part there. So it's just that bottom corner and that top corner we need to smooth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my new smooth start end gradient, and I'm simply going to say, look, have a white knot here, a white one over there, let's make ourselves a little bit of space, and another black knot there. So we're going black, white, and then white, black. So this means we're going to keep this section in the center. This is the area we're going to end up keeping because we're going to multiply these things. So if I go back and I multiply this big band with our helix here, you can see we have now successfully faded out the start and the end of the helix. They now just sort of peter out into nothingness. The problem, of course, is that we've also now lost this section in the middle which used to join these two bits together. So what we need to do in terms of artwork, again, let's open this up. So great, we've rounded off the edge by putting a gradient on there, but we've also ruined the section in the middle. So what we need to do is bring back this middle part. So I'm going to add another gradient. And this will be the restore center gradient. So let's open this guy up. It's going to have to be a horizontal stripe, so I only get that middle part coming back. So let's rotate it around. Let's say type U. No, let's go for type V. And I guess all I'm really after is this white stripe in the center like this. So we can hopefully use this gradient to restore it back. So let's go back to our list of gradients and think for a moment. What do we actually need to do here? Well, I think we might need another folder, or at least a folder might be the easiest way to do this. So really, let's open this up. So this is great, except we need to add a bit of white there and a bit of white there. So I'm trying to really add or merge together this big vertical slab and this horizontal slab. So the easiest way really to do this will be to make a folder, put our two sort of big chunky gradients inside, and say to these two things, look, could you just add together? So take that horizontal bar, add this big chunky vertical bar to it, and then that final folder, we can multiply it. And it's sort of working, we just haven't quite got these bits in the right place. So with this center bit, all we need to do here is shuffle this thing left or right, and that will cause it to go up and down. So let's see, whereabouts are we? Let's try shuffling over to the right. Does that help? We're starting to get there. We're starting to get that middle thing back in. Let's shuffle a bit further. In fact, as I slide these around, you can see in real time exactly what it's doing. Would a bit of wireframe mesh help here? Maybe. Okay, so let's slide that over. So that restores the middle. If we go too far, you can see it's going to ruin the top, so let's not go too far with those. Bring these down. So I'm just very gently tweaking this. Okay, but you can see we've ruined the bottom, so let's bring these bottom knots up as well. As these go up, that should put all that smoothing back in again. But we don't want to go too far. And I think that's probably about right. Okay, and that just about wraps this bit up for today. So once again, the full video is available at 3dfluff.com. If you're interested, go take a look. Otherwise, I wish you all the best.